welcome to Mental Health Matters. I'm Shannon Eliot. It's my pleasure to welcome Joshua Walters, a comedian with bipolar disorder whose work explores language, creativity, beatboxing, and mental health. Joshua is a regular contributor to the NPR show Snap Judgment. He also created a play about his life called Madhouse Rhythm. In addition, Joshua is a National Alliance for Mental Illness speaker and leads a support group for young adults with mental health issues. Thanks so much for being here today, Joshua.
Thanks for having me.
I want to dive right in because you have such a fascinating story, your own history with mental illness, as well as what you're doing today as your wellness tool and how you're spreading messages. So I'm curious, when were you first diagnosed with bipolar, and how did your family handle the diagnosis?
I was diagnosed on February 22nd, 2001, and I was 16 years old, going to San Francisco School of the Arts, where I studied theater. And the whole process of being diagnosed and the whole experience was very wild and surreal, and it led me to be involved in the system of psychiatry and medications and getting support wherever I could get it, support groups or family members. And my family was extremely supportive. It was only years later that I realized it's very hard to watch your child be locked away. And it was only years later that I realized how strong my parents were to just stick it through and just be there, because a lot of folks don't have parents and they end up on the streets, and you know, no one's making that frantic phone call at 4 a.m. And when you are that guy who is being made that phone call about, you might think, oh, Mom, you know, you worry so much, but there comes a perspective with getting older where you realize that that call is someone who cares.
That can't be easy. Watching anyone you love go through that, but let alone a child. Yeah, really difficult. Does mental illness run in your family?
It does. My grandfather on my mother's side, Victor, he grew up in Brooklyn, and he would run away at 9 years old and screaming into the night and completely run away from home, and they would have to call the police. And this 9-year-old just like wild on the streets of Brooklyn. And he got older and he had to learn how to deal with these wild emotions and these manic episodes. He had a very wild life. He was a blackjack dealer in Las Vegas, and he ended up on this ship. He was supposed to be on this ship in World War II because he was in the military. And instead of being on that ship, he was in a psych ward. And it ended up that everyone on that ship came into collision with the Japanese kamikaze warplanes, and it crashed the ship, and everyone on that ship died. And he was safe and he was okay. And it was because he was locked away in this
So in this case, mental illness was a blessing.
Yeah, in this mental institution, it was a blessing. And it was that experience, or the experiences that came after that, where he was able to, you know, at least have a child, if not fully be there and fully raise a family. And one of those children was my mom.
You mentioned in your NAMI keynote presentation that you use comedy as a wellness tool. Why comedy? What drew you to that in particular?
You know, comedy is, it's really underrated in the educational sphere. It's often thought of that you need to have content first, and you need to be as informational as possible, which is very true. You need to have a message, but there's nothing like a personal narrative, and there's nothing like a personal story, and there's nothing like a joke that kind of releases this wave of energy through the crowd where people can relax and they're having a good time. And after you do that for many minutes, then people are ready to actually listen to you because you've shared something important. You've made them feel good.
In a safe space.
In a safe space. Yeah. It's made it safe. It's made it family. You know, you laugh around the dinner table, and it's like this ambiance of food and stories, and it's less about a speech. It's less about I'm guilt tripping you. It's less about I have a political agenda.
No preachy.
There's no preachy. It's a little bit more a celebration of the moment, right? Now, once you're able to do that, if you can make people laugh effectively, then you can actually say something extremely important, sometimes extremely painful, and they are more willing to hear you at that point. And I truly believe that even if you have an important message that's going to change people in the way they live, you should have a good time.
Where do you find your inspiration?
I'm just observing things all day long, little experiences, little moments, I'm inspired by like the smallest details and the smallest little thoughts I have, the smallest little poetic moments. Sometimes I don't have to be in a group with other people. Sometimes I can be alone, just walking in nature. I make it a point to be in nature as often as possible. And just being out there and letting my mind expand, or letting kind of my day run, or my relationships kind of play their course in my mind, kind of lets me build a scenario or a joke or a story or a rhyme.
Aside from being inspired by daily life and small occurrences that happen to you on a daily basis, what comedians do you look up to? I'm sure you get inspiration from some of your role models, some of the comedic greats. Who are your comedic greats?
I'm extremely studious of my art form, so I always, you know, I don't know how old I was, 17, 18, 19. I would go to the library, and I go right to the spoken word section, and there would be books on tape by Noam Chomsky, and there would be a bunch of things, and I would check out all the spoken word poetry, comedic legends. And if you made it to the public library of some small town, you're probably a legend, or at least 50 years out of date. But either way, if you made it to the library where there's only 4 comedy CDs, you did something. You affected someone. You're not just the hit of the day. And so I would research these CDs, and one of the first CDs I researched was a Lenny Bruce CD that was extremely wild and like almost schizophrenic. It was like voices and sounds and music. And I didn't understand all the cultural references at 17. He was talking about Eisenhower. He was talking about things that happened in the 50s and 60s, but I didn't really need to, because I wasn't studying the content, I was studying the form. And when I learned that, you know, a comedic voice could be very similar to a voice inside your head, it was very obvious that being a performer, you know, and making it as wild as I wanted to be was totally an option.
Yeah. I know when we spoke over the phone, you also mentioned Jon Stewart, Dave Chappelle, George Carlin, and Richard Pryor. Why these folks in particular?
They're all committed to speaking the truth and taking the truth to the level where it might get them in trouble. So another one of my influences was George Carlin, who in some of his interviews he talks about he didn't really come into his own until he was 45 or 50 years old, and he'd been doing comedy, you know, since he was in his 20s, and he had a 25-year career already, and he had gotten to the Carnegie Hall. It's around 1992 in New York City. He finally got to the Carnegie Hall show, and he just decided he was going to let go of all fear of how people judged him, and he was going to let all fear of that his words could come back and hurt him. And
At the Carnegie.
at the
That's
Carnegie,
when you make that decision.
yeah, and the repercussions didn't matter, because he didn't have any fear anymore. And it's just an interesting notion to be a voice for so many, and, you know, realize that people listen to you and they're affected by you, and then on a deeper level, it really doesn't matter.
You mentioned you started theater and your interest in comedy when you were a teenager. Where did you get the inspiration for your own shows and the idea to create your own performance art?
You know, the process of creating a solo show, you know, anywhere from 60 to 90 minutes where you're on stage by yourself, it's a journey. It just doesn't happen like in 1 week or 1 year or 3 years. It's this journey that has building blocks. And my training as a performer is it starts very young. I was 10 years old, and I walked into the multi-purpose room at Fairlawn View Elementary School in Montera, and I was trying to paint because it was an after-school arts program, and I thought I was going to paint pictures, and I realized we were all there to paint a set for a play. And right at that very moment, they were casting the play on the stage, and this unseen force gravitated me towards the stage. And, you know, these are 10-year-olds. I was 10, and the casting process was like, who wants this role? Raise your hand. And I remember they called out the lead role, Sir Joseph Porter of the HMS Pinafore, and all I had to do was raise my hand, and I got the role. And it was a role that was, looking back, is very similar to what I do now. It was musical, it was comedic, it was authoritarian, it was a character, it was stiff, it was a shot out authority, it was you know, a play on government, a play on power. And I look back at that first role, and that's kind of what I still do now. Now the journey to get there, you know, from theater at 10, I did theater for all through middle school, all through high school, and I left high school, and I started to do hip hop, and I recorded a few hip hop albums in the studio, and then I discovered that I needed to get a live band to perform some of this. So I became more of a musical director, more of a musical guy.
Oh, wow.
It became like a live thing, and then I realized that the music was getting in the way of the words because people couldn't really hear what I was saying with the live band. So I started doing more poetry, more spoken word, and then I realized that poetry and spoken word only takes you so far, and it only boosts you so much. And I started to do stand-up comedy, and from there I realized that comedy is only, you know, as good as a joke. They only want you to be funny, but it's really about a story. So I started to do storytelling, and that was really where I found this is what I do. It's an improvisational rant on my day, on my year, on a moment. It's very specific. There's no script. It's funny. It's not intentionally funny. It's true. It's not intentionally true. This is just my experience. It doesn't have an agenda. It's just my experience. And through all that, I was able to say, well, I like doing this, and I want to do all of it, and I want to incorporate it all, which is where this, you know, a solo show, a one-man show comes into play, where you're on stage and you incorporate all the elements and all the styles and everything you've learned into one thing that becomes your act.
It sounds like you found your calling at 10, even though you might not have known it at the time.
Oh, I knew it.
Yeah, you knew it?
Yeah.
Building on what you were referencing about hip-hop, that's obviously a very notable influence in your shows, and like you said, you recorded a few hip-hop albums. Who are your major hip-hop influences? Who are your favorites and why?
Hip-hop was a very influential force in my creative process. I'm of this generation, this millennialist XY generation of writers that are very influenced by hip-hop, whether they are a part of hip-hop culture or not, much in the way as the beats of the 60s were influenced by jazz. You know, a bunch of white writers from all over the country, San Francisco, Greenwich Village. They weren't jazz musicians, but they definitely were influenced by jazz. And it's no question that they have the spirit of jazz when they write their poetry and their stories. And I'm of this generation that, without a doubt, regardless of if they're a hip-hop artist or not, or if they're an MC or a DJ, breakdancer, graffiti artist, they're influenced by hip-hop culture. They're influenced by the way the language comes together in a poetic form, a personal narrative that's extremely self-referential, that's extremely pop culture referential, right? And that uses a kind of swagger and a kind of, you know, attitude that has, you know, roots that are deeper than jazz, you know, back to blues, that are very cut and dry. This is the way it is, and sometimes it's funny and sometimes it's offensive, and this is how it is. But the important thing is, this is my story and this is the truth. An important element is in the hip-hop progression of my style is that I was a beatboxer from a very early age. And
When did you start that? How old were you?
Right around the end of high school.
Okay.
A few friends of mine would beatbox at School of the Arts, and a month after I graduated, I went to this show called the Vowel Movement. And it was a show completely dedicated to the form of beatboxing, which is the art of vocal percussion, sounds, drums, turntables, all the sounds of hip-hop organically with the human mouth. So it blends this kind of culture of using turntables and being very technology advanced with the music, and brings it right back to a cappella, brings it right back to Motown, and brings it right back to doing it organically before there were even instruments, before there was, you know, even a
before
guitar.
there was technology, yeah.
And this group of guys, they came from all over the West Coast, and we eventually would bring, you know, the New York guys out to perform with us. And I started in a group there, and I was able to, you know, grow with them, and then I realized I needed to incorporate these other things I was learning in poetry and comedy into the act, and I did my own thing, and I really developed my style in a place that was had no fear, had no shame. It was okay if I messed up. It was okay if I failed, because you're 19 or 20 and there's 40 people in the audience, and it doesn't really matter. And the people who were involved were very supportive, and it didn't matter if it was weird, or it was, you know, they were just supportive as coaches and mentors, you know, older generation looking out for you. And eventually what that turned into is I started hosting the show, and we would eventually produce the show, and me and another beatboxer, each box, we would produce the show, and we ended up producing the largest show of that movement,
Wow.
which was like a 500-person turnout,
Wow.
sold-out show at Ashkenaz in Berkeley, and we did it. We were like 22, you know, we started at 18, and we was 22, and now we were running the thing, and we realized that, you know, the power was in our hands, and be it the power of artistic expression or the power of making the show happen and producing it and getting people to come.
That's really exciting.
So yeah, that was a big part of my development.
What's your mission for your comedy shows?
I really want people to just realize that it's okay, and if they're having a hard time, that other people have had a hard time, and they're not the only one, and it's okay to be ridiculous, and it's totally okay to be yourself. And there's nothing wrong with feeling emotions. There's nothing wrong with feeling uncomfortable, because that's just part of the human experience. There's nothing wrong with feeling completely, utterly hopeless and miserable, as long as you can call out to someone, and as long as you can realize that other people have gone through that, and not only will it be better for you, it'll also be worse for you. And it's just part of the progression. It's just part of the wave. And I think humor is a way to break through to that with not actually saying it, not actually literally saying those words, but doing it with a sound or doing it with a gesture that's more universal.
One of your shows is named Madhouse Rhythm, and you seem to embrace the idea of madness, whereas some mental health consumers or those in the mental health community would maybe not be in so favorable of that term. How do you see and define madness?
For me, I like to use a language that, you know, we say illness and we say disease, and those are negative terms because it implies that something's wrong with you, something that needs to be fixed. And I like to use the phrase mad one.
Mad one.
Because you have the mad in there, but there's no illness or disease. You're just one. You're just some one. And mad ones can be anyone from artists to CEOs. And they don't have to be on the fringe. But they've learned to cultivate and utilize their creative desires and maximize their potential. And everyone has this energy, right? Everyone has a life force and energy, but these mad ones sometimes have an incredible excess of energy, right? And if you don't use it, sometimes it can destroy you. And part of becoming a mad one is the awareness that this energy is not a curse. It's not a energy that needs to be thrown away or ignored. It's a blessing, because what are we as humans? What are we trying to do here? You eat food, you go to sleep to replenish your energy sources. And some people are just gifted with enormous amounts of energy. I know I am. I just have an incredible amount of energy. And there comes a time when you realize that that energy can keep you up at night. It can make you feel a panic attack, or you can channel it into something bigger and use it as a tool.
You were recently chosen to give a TED Talk, which is actually quite a big deal. You're one of 3, I believe, in 600 applicants that were chosen to give this talk, so a tremendous honor. Could you tell us a little bit first about what TED is, for those who don't know, and then share what that experience was like?
TED stands for TED, Technology, Entertainment, and Design. So TED is this platform where people get together and they share an idea. It's about the power of an idea and spreading an idea. The speakers don't sell their books, they don't sell their products, they're not shouting out their website at the end. It's more about, I have this great idea and I just want to share it with you. Now TED is, you know, extremely reputable because you can't just sign up for it. You have to be chosen for it. And it's a place where you get to share an idea, and hopefully it'll have some sort of change. Hopefully people will hear it whether it's about the environment or technology or whatever. And I got to go to this audition. It's their first ever audition called the Full Spectrum auditions that took place in New York City in May of 2011. And I got to go, and I was in the room with a bunch of people from all over the world, Israel, Germany, all over, and I got to see what people are doing around the world, be it technology or music or whatever they're creating.
That's really energizing.
It was
and inspiring.
It
Yeah.
was very energizing. Yeah.
So how was your talk?
It was good. It was surreal. It was unreal. It was strange. Strange to be at that level. Strange to be in that room with those people, many of whom I had, seen before on the web or wherever. And it was strange, and it was weird, and it was good. And even though in the moment of the actual talk, I might have felt disconnected, when I talked to people afterwards, especially Chris Anderson, the curator of TED, who said after I got off stage, he said, that was very brave, and I appreciate your heart, and I appreciate your honesty. When he said that, and when the other people in the room said, you just gave me a way to frame my life, Here I am, I'm an entrepreneur, I work 18 hours a day, and I fly all over the place, and I don't know why I'm so different than everyone. And, and I gave them the structure or the frame. The phrase was called the Bipolar Spectrum, where you don't have to be diagnosed to be in this range of very creative and very very energized people. And they said afterwards, they were like, I mean, that's exactly me. And it's so interesting that you can tell your own story and be completely honest and go 100% disclosure, and somehow that resonates with everyone in the room, even though it's just about you.
It must have felt really good.
It
really
did.
good. So this is the $1,000,000 question. You ready?
Mm-hmm.
You wear a fanny pack on stage on a lot of your shows, if not all of your shows.
Mm-hmm.
What's with the fanny pack?
The fanny pack is a way that I can be a little different. And it's also a way to just show visually, hey, it's okay to be different. And it's also okay to be silly. It's okay to make a fashion faux pas. And it doesn't really matter. And what's important is making people feel good.
So I don't need to tell you, but mental health is an extremely complex issue and an extremely sensitive one, both to people with mental health issues as well as their families and even the general public. What has the feedback on your shows been like, both to mental health consumers and to the general audience?
It's been really incredible, because I do a very wide range of different types of performances. Not all of them include mental health. And I've got to experiment with different types of shows, different types of solo shows, and different acts, different themes. So I have sort of a perspective on when I use the topic, and when I, am that figurehead for that topic, and when I'm just a comedian or just a musician or just a storyteller. And it's interesting because the topic resonates with the people in the topic. I'm talking about mental illness, aka mental skillness, right? And that resonates with people who have been diagnosed or have a family member who've been diagnosed, or the friends of that person, or who know a little bit about it, or maybe thought they were supposed to be in that diagnosis, or maybe have done a little research about that, and the percentage of the country that is becoming that niche is becoming increasingly larger every single day. But the interesting thing is when I don't use that topic, when I just am weird, and it's just a show with a fanny pack, and it's just jokes, and it's just beatbox. What's interesting is people resonate with the style, and it touches them in the same way, even though they don't have the language to say that was me. I did a show before TED in New York City at the New Yorican Poets Cafe, and I did a 20-minute beatbox comedy set. mental illness didn't even approach the subject matter. And at the end of the show, some guy came up to me and he said, "Hey, I just want to tell you I have Tourette's." And I was like, huh, you know, that's the kind of comment I would get after Madhouse Rhythm
Right,
or doing like a
right.
show about it.
With mental health content,
But
yeah.
I didn't even mention it. And there was something in the style, there was something in the way I was doing it that made it so he needed to say that.
Would you say that your shows are helping to combat misinformation and stigma around mental illness?
There's an incredible amount of stigma. Some of the people I grew up with had similar conditions as me. But, you know, it's very hard to be open about your whole life and share it with the world unless you have a ridiculous amount of, I don't know, like absence of fear, I guess you could say, which for whatever reason I do. But for a lot of people, the fear of judgment, the fear of being branded, the fear of rejection, the fear of looking different, looking crazy, not being trusted, not having anyone believe what they're saying, not having anyone trust what they're doing is too much. That risk is just too much. They need to go about their day. They work a 9 to 5. They need their word to be their word.
Yeah.
And they need people to believe them, and they need their mom to stop calling everyone they know. So it's interesting when it comes to stigma because I didn't feel a huge amount of stigma because I just didn't care if they had that judgment. They weren't family to me if they had that judgment.
Yeah.
But a lot of people have an incredible amount of guilt, incredible amount of feelings towards the judgment of others. And I feel it's important to just show them that it's okay. And you are who you are, regardless of if that's a label or not.
Absolutely. Well, Joshua, thank you so much for being here today and sharing your story. And thank you so much for the work you're doing because it really is, it's inventive and it's absolutely worth it. So thank you.
Thank you.
To learn more about Joshua and Madhouse Rhythm, please visit his website at www.thejoshuawalters.com. To view his TED Talk entitled On Being Just Crazy Enough, visit www.ted.com/talks. To listen to the NPR show Snap Judgment, please visit snapjudgment.org. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.